Well, hi there. Welcome to the Metaviews. Recorded live in front of an automated audience. And it's actually been quite a bit of time since we've joined you, you've joined us. Some people it might be months, others it could be years. So this is the Resurgence episode, where I'm kind of putting this episode out there as a heads up that maybe there's some stuff following after it. I mean, it's been a bumpy few years, I think, for all of us. Certainly for myself, I've always had a precarious health, but in the context of a never-ending pandemic, as Harriet in the background would say, it's been a barking rough time. In particular, 2023, I almost died. Had one of those health episodes amidst a failing healthcare system that really pushed my body and my mind and my essence to the edge. So now that, the phoenix is rising out of the ashes, now that I've been sort of not healthy, but stable enough for an extended period of time, well, it's time to get the Metaviews going again. The Metaviews to the future, as this podcast was originally titled. And while I've been kind of measuring back and forth whether to retitle that, call it just Metaviews, or focus on a kind of specific niche, as everyone says you're supposed to do, no, my gut instinct tells me Metaviews is the right focus, the big picture. And when I say Metaviews to the future, it's a big picture to get ourselves out of whatever mess we currently find ourselves in, which currently in early January 2025, it is one bloody hell stinking mess. And that's really where, my health, in both something that I've struggled with in the last couple of years, is really something that motivates me to do this. I think intellectually, I always understood that the mind and body are one. But now I live it. Now I fundamentally understand the way in which our intuition, our consciousness, our immune system, our general well-being, heck, it's all in the gut. It's the biota, the combination of bacteria, viruses, and who knows what else lives down there that really is the basis of who we are as human beings. I even sometimes like to joke that we're not even individuals. We're federations of bacteria, that the individual is sort of how we experience it and how we communicate to other humans. But it's kind of more complicated to that. And maybe that's why we need the Metaviews. So given that I wanted to put this episode kind of in the sand before I kind of pivot, but not so much go in a new direction, but maybe set a different pace, I wanted to briefly spend a moment kind of talking about the history of Metaviews as a whole, because I don't think there's ever really been a history. I mean, if I were to be honest, thank you. If I were to be honest, I'm kind of an opponent to history. I've always been, the media collective always had the slogan, "Don't get caught." And that on one level means you got to always be destroying evidence, which in a surveillance society can be really difficult. And Metaviews was always designed as not so much a cover or a front, but an obfuscation, a deliberate obfuscation. On the one hand, it clearly says what I do, and what I do often is get barked at by dogs. But I love the big picture. I love getting as high as possible and seeing what there is to see. If you imagine it in the climbing a mountain, to really get in as much information, get the full scope of society. And in that regard, Metaviews has both been my legal vehicle in terms of Metaviews Media Management Limited, currently located in Mississippi Mills, Ontario, Canada. But it's also as a brand, a provocation. Right? A way of saying, get your head out of your ass, get your head out of the sand, look up and pay attention. And, quite frankly, I don't think I've been doing a good job of that the last few years, certainly heading into the just past U.S. presidential election. I'll be honest, I didn't see it coming out the way it did. And I should have. I did in 2016. I had at that point not just a confidence of what the Metaview was, but a real connection to what's on the ground, the political street, the word on the political street, as it would be. And in realizing I've lost that, it made me think, I need to get back into practicing the Metaview. Now, Ken Chase of heavycomputing.ca, he kind of deserves the credit, I think, for the word Metaviews. I think it was something that he and I kind of came up with in an IRC chat at some point, or maybe even an earlier iteration of some of the events that we used to attend and organize. But I think he was even the first person to register the domain name metaviews.ca, although I could be mistaken of that. So I do have to give Ken a credit for really giving me metaviews.ca as a kind of gift, as a brand. And he kind of deserves authorship in that sense. But Metaviews was originally designed as a paid subscription business. I just discovered the world of syndicated research, that you could charge people like an annual fee and then give them research, give them knowledge, maybe ended up with an annual report. So that was really the first iteration of Metaviews. And this is where Mark Weisblot, aka 1236, who I suspect may be listening right now at double speed, he also deserves some co-authorship credit for where Metaviews came from, because he was really there at the beginning, both for the paid subscription model, where we charged people $5,000 a year, mostly corporations, mostly organizations, but there were some individuals who had the means and paid the fee. We paid them for a year-long study called The Future of Authority. And I'd have to look up when this was. I'm pretty certain this was, I want to say 2011, like well over a decade ago, maybe 15 years or so more. Mark, I'm sure you could correct us in the chat, as it were, in the colloquial chat. But it was a really successful endeavor, certainly intellectually, where we had a newsletter, we had weekly telesalons, which this is way before Zoom, so we were kind of constructing, these bubblegum shoelaces teleconferencing solutions, which were often telephone based, but we were recording the video and putting it up on YouTube, and it's still there as part of our YouTube channel, which this video is featured on. Unfortunately, if you're listening to this on the podcast does not go that far back in time. But it was fun. It was a great way to fund research for a year. Unfortunately, the customers and what we wanted to do really wasn't aligned. The conception, most of the paid subscriber research was quantitative. It's stats, and it's proprietary stats. And even the qualitative stuff in terms of surveys was really quite basic and pedestrian. And what we were trying to do was a little more surreal, a little more punk, a little more kind of not avant-garde per se, but the edge of the internet. And I think it was therefore difficult to find the right combination of free radicals and corporations to really allow that to happen. But it was a great experiment that we then further iterated by keeping the newsletter going for quite a while. And Mark Weisblot was a phenomenal editor and author in really creating the Metaviews newsletter as a literal meta view of looking at pop culture, at looking at politics from its intersections, its interconnections, and really helping subscribers get a sense of what the heck is going on. And it was a lot of fun, and it evolved, quite frankly, into the Academy of the Impossible, which was a storefront on Wallace Avenue in Toronto, in the neighborhood called the Junction Triangle. And the Academy of the Impossible was a collaboration with a bunch of different professionals and artists and academics and anarchists to basically share a space and create a motley crew, create a community of really wild and creative people. Metaviews produced all sorts of salons and programming and political events. Josh Hayner had an Aikido dojo, so he taught martial arts and self-defense, as well as a first aid for protests and riots and police violence. We had all sorts of groups using that space, and of course, Emily Polweary ran the Toronto Street Writers, which was a brilliant group of young geniuses, from poets to artists to rappers to video game enthusiasts. It really was a great community, and we did it for a couple of years. But at a certain point, you can't sustain that kind of work without substantive resources. And I don't need to tell anyone listening that those substantive resources have never really existed for the initiatives we describe unless they lean hard right. And we'll get to that in a moment, because I'm setting up the history to give a sense of our context, our present. But when the Academy of the Impossible shut down, Metaviews didn't shut down, but went on a hiatus as well. And I think where I went through my own personal transformation, my own relationship transformation, Metaviews became almost a private brand. It became something that was like a secret handshake. And the Academy of the Impossible was similar, although where the Academy of the Impossible sort of re-manifest was in dinner salons, which was a collaboration with an underground restaurant called the House of Parliament. And it was a really wonderful way to connect food and wine and ideas and discussions and community. And I used it as an opportunity to really learn about the food and beverage industry, to learn about restaurants, to learn about bars, both how they operate and the business model, partly because I was foolish and naive for a brief period of time to think that I should invest or put my labor and time and money into such a thing. Oh, am I glad that I was disavowed of such a notion, especially now that the pandemic has come and we see the devastation it wrought on that particular industry and sector. But nonetheless, it was a wonderful experience in understanding the value of events and real person events and human connection. But it also made me want to get closer in touch with food and want to get connected to food. And that's kind of how the Academy of the Impossible got its current manifestation under the leadership of the brilliant Dr. Jeanette Herla, which is as a farm, which is where I live. And living on a farm, living with animals, growing your own food, raising your own food is a phenomenal ancestral experience. It is such an unending opportunity for humility, for wisdom, for joy, for nourishment, and most importantly, for learning. And so subsequently, Metaviews for a while kind of took a back seat to, becoming a farmer and understanding the world of agriculture and living rurally. And this was all before the pandemic, thankfully, because once the pandemic hit, rural property, especially here in Ontario, became very expensive. And it was as the pandemic was really starting to enter into the long term, or actually, no, sorry, that is COVID really messed up my brain. It was actually right before the pandemic that I restarted the Metaviews newsletter. There was a Metaviews Substack. The first Metaviews Substack ran from 2019 until maybe 2021. I think it was just under 2 years. And it was a daily newsletter, paid only at that time. I was pretty disciplined and insistent that all posts were behind a paywall. I encouraged people to share it freely, but I really wanted to get paid subscribers. And that's once the pandemic hit, it really focused to pandemic content. And it really became my way of not just trying to understand the pandemic, trying to process COVID, but also helping my community do the same, and I've always desired to be part of community, to do service for community. And that was really what Metaviews at that time was trying to accomplish. And there got to a certain point in the pandemic when it was clear to me that the conspiracists were winning, that public health was failing, that the shift in authority, which has always been really the focus of Metaviews as a through line, that the shift in authority was not going in a good direction. And my instinct to not get caught, to erase evidence, this is where I'll say, hey, Joe Biden, as much as I might not like him, please grant immunity to Dr. Fauci. This is where I thought, I should erase the record. And I just deleted that Substack. I just turned my back on it. It was, several hundred articles, some of which really good. My mom still talks to me all the time about how much she loved those articles. And they still exist in somebody's Gmail, that they could search and find if they wanted. But I felt, we lost that battle. The conspiracists won. Those of us who were trying to navigate between the institutional failure on the one hand and the complete conspiracy and paranoia on the other to communicate and translate the knowledge and science of medicine of the pandemic, we got our asses kicked. And I kind of felt, history goes to the victors. I'll erase my account of it. And I don't regret that, the same way I don't regret selling the Bitcoin I had in 2013 for, $50 a pop. I don't regret these things. They're part of life. They're part of learning. But it is also part of the Metaviews history. And that fundamentally is what I'm trying to do in this episode. So that after I sort of stopped that first iteration of the Metaviews Substack, that's when my health really started to go sideways, and with it, my sanity. And it took a while for me to really work through that stuff. And when I was really at my most ill, I kind of had this idea, along with a collaborator, to do something called the Echo Punks. So really, right when I kind of came out of the quote-unquote hospital, although given our failing healthcare system, I was thankfully not in the hospital. I was in Toronto under great care, but a family care, and not the train wreck that is the Ontario hospital system. I digress. But I pretty much went right into this project, which was called the Echo Punks. And if I'm honest, the Echo Punks was really just a rebrand of Metaviews to try and collaborate with someone who had not been part of Metaviews. And that might have been the problem. In that, I think he looked upon Metaviews as something that was attractive, but he missed the core radical element that has always driven this enterprise. And it's both the premise of the power is at the periphery, that there's something to being the outlier, that it is fundamentally a radical position in which you're not trying to reinforce the mainstream. You're trying to challenge, if not outright smash it. You're trying to really provoke a different dialogue, a critical perspective. And I think that's where the Echo Punks was just a powerful brand, but not enough substance. And I guess that's why I'm coming back to Metaviews, because as I sort of started in the intro, stakes are high. And stakes are high in the sense that we are on the verge of a kind of fascism, a kind of authoritarian society that my entire life I kind of feared. But, at the same time, it's kind of hard to laugh at. I know. I try to provoke that audience from the reaction sometimes. And part of Metaviews has been me trying to improvise, because as you notice, this is all live. I'm not doing takes. I don't have a script. But these are tough times to find the Metaviews. These are easy times to get lost in the darkness, to get lost in the grind, to get lost in the narratives that are being peddled by the disinformation entertainment complex. So I think Metaviews fundamentally is about the future of authority. And the future of authority cannot be authoritarianism. We have to get past authoritarianism to see a future that discards it, to see a future that says, yeah, that's obsolete, it doesn't work, it's a joke, it's a conspiracy, it's a useless myth that belongs in past centuries but not the current. And I think fundamentally that will be the through line of the work we do, but also the history of Metaviews has been, quote unquote, accessible, right? We're not Marxist-Leninists. We're not anarchists. We're not, crazy radicals who are towing some party line. In fact, were arguably anti-partisan, anti-ideological. But at the same time, there is a commitment to revolution, a commitment to radical thinking, a commitment to approaching that big picture. So that maybe is part of the dance that I'm going to look at. How do you be accessible? How do you not alienate as many people as possible? Everyone except the fascists, everyone except the authoritarians, as it were. And at the same time, how do you, try to make sure that you are still being honest to yourself, honest to your views? And that to me is the joy. That's what I have fun in doing this particular kind of work. And so that's where I've restarted the Substack. So the Substack's going again. I think I've knocked out maybe 70 issues so far. Metaviews.substack.com is, back where it's going. It's all free this time. I'm not going to paywall it, although people can certainly pay if you can afford and you have the means. But I think it's a good vehicle to try to work out some of these ideas, try to share some of this stuff. And look, it's a completely different world from the first time I did Substack. It's a completely different Substack than the first time I did Substack. The first time I did Substack, I was quite disappointed with their algorithm and the way in which they promote your post to other people on the platform. Versus the new Substack, I've already gotten quite a few modest subscribers from their platform just by doing what I do and having activity. So I find that enough incentive to keep going on for now. But I've also, over the end of December, the start of January, I've started flirting with the idea of podcasting again. And I actually did a few episodes in the fall that I didn't publish, that, I went through the ropes. I hope I published this one, quite frankly. I've done this before where I've kind of made an episode, listened to it and said, no, I'm not with it. And I couldn't publish it. But I kind of want to move forward and do this again for the same reasons that I've discussed already, that we need to see a future past authoritarianism. We need to see a future of authority past authoritarianism. And we need to create stories and narratives that give us a different view of the meta, a different meta view of society. Of course, as an aside, there was that whole hype cycle of the metaverse, right? When Facebook changed their name to Meta. And that I was also embarrassed then. That's also when I was like, oh, fuck, Metaviews. What a shitty name. Oh, okay, I won't tell people about it. And that's also where the EchoPunks rebranding was kind of part of. Because it felt like Metaviews was tainted, that it was associated with those metaverse goons and the Meta as a company. But maybe we'll talk about that in future episodes and why that association maybe is worth mining and getting into. But one of the key lessons or key insights that came out of the EchoPunks episode, the EchoPunks indigestion, that's what we'll call it, that it's not about quality, it is about quantity. That we are not in a society in which we should be spending a lot of time on the content we create, although I am interested in making it fun and making it enjoyable. But the name of the game is quantity. And if my goal here is to counter authoritarianism, to create a future past authoritarianism, a future of authority that is just, that represents the people, that is something we all would desire and want to live for, it takes a lot of quantity. It takes a lot of documentation. It takes a data trail, data crumbs across the internet so people can find that stuff. Because if you just rely upon the old content you've created, it gets buried. Mind you, I have had some youngins who have found my old archives from the 90s who came up to me and said, do you still believe that stuff? To which I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. Let's talk about it. So I think there's a need moving forward to do more, to put out more. And I think this podcast may be a vehicle for that. So who knows? No promises. But if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, if I actually publish this, then that means it's a go. That means at least for the short term, until the growing season starts, until the weather starts getting a little warmer, I'm going to start putting out some crazy stuff, some crazy ideas. And in particular with this podcast, it's always been about guests. I much prefer to interview people than to do what I'm doing now, which is to just give out a monologue. And again, that's where the internet has changed quite a bit since I started this podcast, and even since the early days of my radio flirtations. Because as a youngin', I loved radio. I mean, CKLN, CIUT, these were the call signs that I grew up with. And even though I appeared on those stations, which was a lifelong dream, and I am appearing now, actually, on my FM stations across Ontario as their techspert weekly, podcasting is really becoming a whole new exciting thing that I'm quite excited about. And there's a lot of opportunities out there that I'm going to start playing with. So that's why we're back. That's why we're here as Metaviews. But here's the other thing. And here's where I'll sort of start concluding and talk about potential shout-outs. I may also be starting another podcast because I get depressed pretty much every, December as the gets really dark and it gets cold. And my depression often revolves around the idea of not feeling like there's any role for me in society. Like I'm not just an outlier, I'm an outcast and I'm not wanted. The usual insecurity that a lot of people deal with. But then, my good and longtime friend, Alan Gregg, reached out and he said some really nice things to me and really encouraged me, both in terms of my thinking and in terms of my writing. And so he and I may start a podcast, which I think has tremendous potential. So you heard it here first. Can't guarantee it'll happen until these things happen. You know how it is. But again, Mark Weisblot, you're listening on double speed. You're someone who pays attention to the podcast industry. I think an Alan Gregg, Jesse Hirsch podcast would be actually kind of fun. At the very least, I've convinced Alan to get on Substack. So if you go to alangregg.substack.com, you can sign up early before anyone else even knows. But I suspect in the next short while, you'll be hearing about that as well. So thanks for listening. Shout outs to my folks, my parents, my mom, who very much encouraged me to get this second Metaviews Substack iteration going again. Shout out to Toronto Mike, who has the Toronto Mike podcast, which I quite enjoy listening to. And he's got a community, the Toronto Mike Universe. I am, of course, now a friend of Toronto Mike, an FOTM, which is an honor that has also helped kind of boost my confidence and lift my spirits. Shout out to Lee Rosevear, whose music we're going to be using as part of our show. Those are some of his beats right there. Some others that I'll play in a moment. Shout out to Dr. Jeanette Herla, my partner, and of course someone who inspires me every day in terms of her intelligence. And hopefully her Substack start going soon. And if she gets that together, then of course expect her podcast, which would be packed dense with all sorts of knowledge and mansplaining from Dr. Jeanette Herla. And of course, a shout out to Vas Bednar, also someone who's really helped me get through the last couple of years. Her Substack, Regs to Riches, is fantastic. And of course, she's got a bunch of different podcasts, both with the Globe and Mail, as well as with CG. So I definitely have to give props to her, and thanks to her as well. Shout out to Brian Paul, who faithfully likes my posts in a manner that keeps me going. Brian, often when I see your post, I'm like, yes, finally. And of course, I've already shouted out Mark Weisblot, aka 1236, a couple of times. And as I start getting more into the politics of this, and as we perhaps head to a federal election, maybe one of our episodes will look at the 1236 caucus coming to a Canadian federal government near you, but no promises of that. My hope is to do shout-outs at the end of every episode, partly as a way to show thanks, but also to let you, the listeners, Google some names that might be interesting. But for the rest of you, thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to our audience, who've been great and fantastic. And we hope to see you soon or talk to you soon. I hope to be producing soon. All right, thanks. Take care.